The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is an open-world action-adventure game developed and published by Nintendo. The game was released in March of 2017 for the Nintendo Wii U and the Nintendo Switch. The footage throughout this review was recorded from the Switch version of the game in docked mode, as I have no way to record portable mode at this time. In The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, you take on the role of Link, who wakes up after sleeping for 100 years to defeat the evil Calamity Ganon who has, in Link's absence, taken over and wreaked havoc upon Hyrule. As Link, you'll travel across Hyrule, collecting gear, upgrading your stats, improving the powers of the Sheikah Slate, a piece of ancient technology that has special powers, all in preparation for your fight against Ganon. The game features much more open-ended design, similar to the first Zelda game, while also grabbing elements from the rest of the series and popular, modern, open-world games. But is Breath of the Wild any good? Let's find out with The Good. Breath of the Wild's choice to divert from the standard Zelda formula and go completely open world was a brilliant one. The 3D Zelda games over the years started to become more and more restrictive, and they never really stopped holding the player's hand. This hit its frustrating peak with Skyward Sword on the Wii, which I found offensive in its degree it held your hand. Thankfully, Breath of the Wild is almost the exact opposite. The game doesn't just simply drop you in and say go, like in Zelda 1, there is a small tutorial area, but this tutorial is short and sweet and it teaches you the tools that you'll be utilizing in this world. The world itself feels massive. While other games may have bigger maps, I haven't played a game with a map that felt bigger than Zelda's. This is because of the traversal options and the use of vertical space. In other games, you may have a larger map, but you more than likely have options for quickly traversing the terrain, such as a car or some other kind of vehicle. The majority of my time in Breath of the Wild was spent sprinting and climbing. There are horses in the game for faster travel, but I often found myself getting off a horse to climb a mountain. Eventually, I stopped using these horses because I found they are really only good for roads or straightaways. The climbing system in this game is fantastic. Your climbing, like most actions in the game, such as sprinting or swimming, is dictated by how much stamina you have. You can climb just about any surface in this game. Of course, there are some you can't grab, but those are very few and far between, and mostly only found in the shrines, which we'll talk about later. When climbing, you have the option to propel yourself upwards at an increased rate, but it's at the cost of extra stamina. Climbing then becomes this mini trade-off of time spent climbing versus stamina. Do you have enough stamina to get up this cliff quickly? Should you just climb up slowly and be safe? This small mechanic made climbing really enjoyable. It also added to the feeling of getting stronger, as my stamina wheel increased. Climbing peaks that I had also climbed before felt like very different experiences. I was able to burst up them very quickly. Zelda's use of vertical space in general is great. One of my least favorite things that open world games usually have you do is climb towers that you find to fill out your map. Breath of the Wild has towers, but I love them. They're the only implementation of towers that I have really enjoyed. Each tower has a unique climbing challenge. For instance, some towers are a bit of a maze with thick brambles covering certain pathways. Once you get to the top of the tower, it fills out your map, but only the topographical features. Usually in open world games, the tower will reveal side missions and all the locations on your minimap. Zelda instead tasks the player with using their newfound height to actually look around with the scope and manually pin and stamp locations on their map. This was a great deal of fun and invoked a feeling of scribbling together your own map during an adventure. Exploring the world itself is amazing. It never feels like there is a dull area. There's always something interesting and new to discover. All over the map you'll find these little structures called shrines. These are little challenges that reward you with a spirit orb. Spirit orbs can be used to upgrade your hearts or your stamina. The challenges in these shrines are usually a puzzle, although sometimes you'll get a combat challenge or something completely different like a mini-golfing, motion-controlled puzzle thing. The shrines make up the majority of the puzzles you'll find in Breath of the Wild. Thankfully, they're a ton of fun. The challenges you find inside are almost completely different to anything you'd find on the overworld. Most of the puzzles require use of the Sheikah Slate powers. I found that these shrines gave me great ideas on how to use these powers in the overworld once I got back out. The Slate powers are honestly one of my favorite things in Breath of the Wild. Stasis especially leads to some great moments, whether that be trying to ride a box across the map, or simply freezing and bashing enemies' heads in. Speaking of bashing enemies' heads in, the combat in Breath of the Wild is the best in any Zelda game. Other Zelda games may have had more moves, but they've never had a reason to use them. Breath of the Wild is different. There's backstabs, parries, deflects, dodges, and various strikes and slashes, but most importantly, there's a reason to use them all. The combat varies greatly from enemy to enemy, requiring different tactics for each opponent. Fighting a Moblin is completely different from fighting a Stalnox or a Lionel. The game has a wide enough selection of combat options for these encounters to feel truly different. Presentation-wise, Breath of the Wild is gorgeous. The art style carries this game a long way, considering it's graphically very unimpressive. The music is also worth highlighting. It's not the traditional heroic or grandiose Zelda music, it's much more subdued and somber, but that works wonderfully with Breath of the Wild's tone. When the action ramps up, the music does as well. The castle theme is one of my favorite Zelda songs and sets the mood perfectly. But no game is perfect, and Breath of the Wild has its fair share of flaws. So it's time to look at the bad. The inventory management in this game is pretty terrible. You can quickly swap between weapons, but there's no way to quickly drop an item. There were so many times when I opened a chest, found an amazing sword, got a message telling me my inventory was full, had to open my inventory, then drop the item I wanted to drop, and go through the whole chest opening animation again before I could get the sword. It's really not a huge deal, but it's definitely a hassle. And probably the biggest problem plaguing this game is the performance. It's incredibly rough. Many times the game will drop well below 30 frames, and in some special locations it'll be running at a constant like 20 frames per second, which is really unacceptable. Adding to this, the game has some of the worst pop-in I've ever seen in a game, with giant rocks and other very large fixtures just popping into view unannounced. Usually there's some sort of fade, but not in Zelda. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is my favorite Zelda game hands down. It's so unique and interesting, and I had tons of hours of fun, but it's also really familiar. It's doing new and different things while also aping a lot from other popular open world games and older Zelda titles. It's almost oxymoronic in its design. But in the end, it amounts to a fantastic and incredibly enjoyable experience that I urge everyone, even non-Zelda fans, to play. Breath of the Wild gets a smiling Iwata from above, out of 10. Thanks for watching, and tune in next time for another Infinite Backlog review.